Redditors who have been clinically dead, what did you experience in death, if anything? I was dead for 6 minutes. I was lying there on the gurney, feeling myself get colder. Slowly, I started to warm up, and everything became calm. It was peaceful, no pain, no noise. I thought about my daughter, reliving moments with her. Then, nothing. It was like before I was born, just black. Being revived, though? That was hell. I came back to horrible smells, pain, and noise, vomited all over a nurse. Dying was honestly the best part of the experience. The startling calmness. I coded after surgery. I could see and hear everything, but I couldn't feel anything. It was unsettling. The weirdest part was the emotional detachment. I wasn't scared or worried, just waiting to find out if I was going to die or not. A family goodbye. My 4-year-old daughter had pneumonia and was in bad shape. One night, she woke up and asked about her grandma. Grandma had passed away earlier that day, but we hadn't told her. My daughter said, Grandma came in my dream and said, "It's not your time yet. I'll go for you." The next day, my daughter was almost fully recovered. An overdose I didn't expect. I overdosed and flatlined. I didn't see a thing. When they hit me with Narcan, I woke up angry, ripping out my IVs and swearing at the staff. To this day, I don't remember any of it, just darkness until I was awake again. Now, 6 years clean. Blackness and peace. My wife died twice in 3 months due to multiple health complications. When I asked her what she remembered, she told me she saw nothing, just blackness. It wasn't scary, just empty, with no pain. When she finally passed for good, I believe she felt the same peace. Each of these stories highlights the unique, often profound experiences people have when teetering on the edge of life and death. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to follow for more fascinating stories. Redditors who have been clinically dead. What did you experience in death, if anything? Existence without form. When I died, it wasn't like the typical stories. I had no visions, no light, just a sensation of floating, existing without a body. It was comforting, like something was wrapping around me, telling me it was okay. But then I realized I had to come back. I didn't want to, but I had to fix my life. The hellish nightmare. My dad was terrified of death because his near-death experiences weren't peaceful. He believed he was in hell, living through a day repeatedly, fully conscious of the pain and suffocation. But in his final moments, he told me, "I know without a doubt there is an afterlife. Everyone has their own color, and they're trying to reach white." He wished he had done more in life, but in the end, he felt at peace. The ultimate peace. I was dead for almost 3 minutes after an allergic reaction. It felt like falling into a deep, calm sleep, no fear or panic. Coming back was jarring, but the experience made me realize death isn't something to be afraid of. Comfort in finality. So many stories here describe death as peaceful or even euphoric. It's comforting to know that when the time comes, it might just be the calmest moment of your life. An unexpected sense of peace. Not my story, but the head of my program was in a terrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes on the scene while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she's ever had. It wasn't like the typical stories of a bright light, just blank black nothingness, but she described it as comforting, something beyond words. When she finally came back, she was furious at the paramedic who revived her because she didn't want to leave that place. She told us she's not afraid to go back when it's her time. She's a highly logical person, not religious at all, and works in mortuary science. It's ironic because she always dismisses ghost stories, but this one experience turned me into a believer. To be clear, she wasn't advocating for anything drastic like suicide. She stressed that. She's just ready to embrace death when it's truly her time. The final goodbye. I remember my father, who had been in and out of hospitals, once telling me he was scared of dying because all he experienced in his near-death moments was terror. But in his last days, that fear was gone. He told me about a place where everyone is trying to get to white, a place where time doesn't exist, and all he wished was that he had done more in life. It gave me peace to know that in the end, he found comfort. Have you ever faced the edge? Many stories here describe death as peaceful, even welcoming. Have you ever had a similar experience or know someone who has? Tell us your thoughts below, and make sure to follow for more mind-opening stories. A Peaceful Void. A friend of mine, who technically died twice, described death as being surrounded by a comforting darkness while floating in a warm, gel-like substance. She said it was so peaceful that she never wanted to leave that state. The Matrix comparison. When I heard that, it instantly reminded me of the tanks from The Matrix. It's eerie how close her description is to the idea of being suspended in that gel. Reincarnation? Or maybe it's more like a womb, symbolizing reincarnation. It's a comforting thought that maybe near-death experiences are tied to rebirth in some way. One person mentioned, when you have a near-death experience, you're simultaneously still birthing into your next life. It's a strangely comforting idea. A different perspective on loss. For someone who's suffered from miscarriages, that notion can offer a sense of peace. Perhaps those souls couldn't be here with us, but maybe they've survived somewhere else, in another form, another life. Brain running out of oxygen. One commenter speculated that these serene experiences could be linked to hypoxia, where the brain is deprived of oxygen and starts shutting down. Apparently, most people feel happier with less brain function, strangely comforting, but also a little unsettling. A shared desire to return. Many who experience this peaceful void say they wish they could stay there forever. It seems that, for some, the experience of death is not filled with fear, but with a strange sense of calm and serenity. Electrocuted by 13,800 volts. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say it's likely the first hit stopped my heart, and the second one started it, before I was pulled like a lifeless corpse to safety. I remember experiencing the darkest dark and the most silent silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change. It could have been hours, it seemed. It was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating and floated towards something that I eventually realized was my body and reality. Upon joining with whatever it was I was floating towards, I became self-aware in my body and heard the electricity making horrible noises and knew I was in danger. From there, it was a horribly painful experience where I lost most of my toes due to tissue death and had severe electrical burns on all 4 limbs. More surgeries than I care to count, and seeing the round bone ends of my toes that were freshly amputated still haunts me a little. Edit. Thank you everyone for helping me understand something that happened over 12 years ago. I was in the hospital for about a month inpatient, and then for 10 months, daily as an outpatient. Basically sent me home for my mental sanity, but needed daily attention. I got addicted to painkillers, had to learn to walk again, and had to see a pain management therapist. It was horrible at times, but eventually the pain began to subside. I went back to school and became an engineer, and I don't think I'd be where I am without this thing happening. Really strange to think that I am in some way grateful now. Also, I can't watch horror anymore. Hollywood actually does a very realistic job. A sense of peace for the departed. As someone who lost his younger brother 4 months ago to psychosis-induced suicide after years of painful and miserable addiction and anxiety and depression, many of these comments give me more of a sense of peace that he just couldn't be here anymore and needed to go. I hope he felt okay in his final moments and wasn't in the constant pain he felt 24/7 here and in his mind. Finding peace after loss. My sister killed herself in November of last year at the age of 15, and my mother couldn't take the grief and killed herself a couple of weeks ago. I hope they are both at peace because they hated it here. No heaven. No hell. I hope it's just peace. This thread and stories like these give me hope. The feeling of drowning in peace. I drowned and was resuscitated when I was a teenager. I remember struggling mightily, and then, when I was sure there wasn't any hope, I had this distinct feeling of, okay then, I can let go. From that moment on, there was peace, total peace. Nothing hurt, and I didn't even feel the dying part. The aftermath of a near-death experience. I was dead for a very short period of time, like 30 seconds to a minute. It's not like sleeping at all. I never noticed it before, but when I was out, it was like this perfect nothingness. And once they brought me back, part of me wished I could have stayed. There's no positive feeling there, but all your stress, nightmares, and troubles are just gone. It's beautiful in a way. A shared experience with loss. I lost my brother 3 years ago, also to suicide. I still find these things very comforting. It makes me think that he at least had some peace. Experiencing death during surgery. I was not the one who experienced this, but one of my teachers coded 3 times during open-heart surgery. When she regained consciousness, she spoke of all these souls that she saw, and she was scared for them. Her surgery was on the day the I-35W bridge collapsed in Minneapolis, the same city where she was operated on. The serenity of flatlining. I had a tilt table test because I was consistently fainting. During the test, I coded for just under 2 minutes. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt, just pure 100% peace. No panic, no pain, no sadness, just bliss. But as soon as I came to, I felt seriously angry, like I had been ripped from that calm place and thrown back into chaos. Seeing dead relatives during surgery. Former coworker of mine died during heart surgery. I think she was out for 90 seconds or close to it. She wasn't religious or anything. She said that she remembered being in the room and seeing her dead uncle and cousin standing at the far end of the room watching everything going on. Edit. She shared this information during an icebreaker. Give us a fun fact about yourself. She didn't remember seeing a light or anything, just her dead relatives at the end of the room. Mom's hilarious near-death moment. My mom died during surgery as well, although I'm not sure how long she stayed dead. She's always been salty about the lack of white light and relatives. I was just kind of watching the room while this doctor beat on my chest and kept yelling at me to breathe. God damn you, breathe. So finally I was like, fucking fine, I'll breathe. Jesus. And then the next thing I knew, I was in the recovery room. It was some bullshit. A spiritual visit across the ocean. Last year, my great-uncle died in Canada. That same day, I sat in my bedroom in the UK and had a sudden urge to check if he was all right. I hardly knew him, and therefore he never crossed my mind. The day after, my mum told me he'd died. I believe his spirit visited me so I could tell my family. Choosing to live after seeing Grandpa. I saw my grandpa. We talked for a while, and he said I could go back with him, or stay. I looked down and saw myself in that hospital bed with my brother holding my hand. He felt it turn cold, and I never saw him cry that way. I went back into my body and felt more pain than I knew in my life. Been a year of recovery, and I lost most of my memory, but I'm happy. The field of flowers with great-grandma, not necessarily clinically dead, but I was pronounced dead 2 times in the same night after a car accident I was in when I was 16. My great-grandma pulled me out of the car, and we walked through this really peaceful field of flowers. When I woke up 2 weeks later, she was sitting on the edge of my bed and told me to tell my mom that everything was going to be okay. My great-grandma died when I was 10, and before that, she had been bedridden after a stroke. I never saw her walk or heard her talk in my entire life. Out of body, watching from above. One of my old frat brothers was clinically dead for like 40 seconds because of Xanax. He said that he saw himself floating above his body in the hospital room. He saw doctors and nurses working on him and family in the room. He slowly floated towards a light and said it was the most peaceful feeling he has ever experienced, impossible to describe with words. He saw some long-gone family in the light, but they told him it wasn't his time. He floated back down, and when he woke up, he was furious because he felt so good. Not me, but right before my great-grandma passed, she kept trying to explain these VVD colors and smells. She kept saying how beautiful things were, and she was saying it's unlike anything she ever saw. She was an extremely religious woman. A little while after the colors and smells, she told us, he said we have to say it's okay for her to go. I mean, my whole family was standing around saying goodbye. I vividly remember this, even though I was only 9. Once we all said it was okay, she passed on. Also the night before, she was talking to herself. We asked her what's going on, and she pointed at the chair across the room and said, "Please don't be rude. I'm having a conversation with her." And we were confused and asked about what, and she said the woman was explaining what we were going to do with our futures. So strange, and I'll never know if it was real or what was happening. But it's kind of cool to think it's real. This is my mother's story. I was privileged to be there when she talked to her doctor the next day and to witness his reaction. She had been afraid to die. After this experience, she was no longer afraid and started enjoying life more. Seizing the day, if you will. My mother was in the hospital being treated for a reaction to arthritis medication. This was more than 30 years ago, so procedures have changed. She was in a bed far from the nurse's station because she was stable and in no danger. For some reason, her heart stopped. They never found out why. The nurse found her without a pulse and called a code. My mother, meanwhile, had left her body and was floating up by the ceiling. She said she felt no fear, only wonder at what was happening and pity for the poor body laying on the bed because it was so sick and damaged. She had a lot wrong with her. As the team was working on her without success, and the attending physician went down the hall to the nurse's desk, my mom was curious about what he was going to say, so she followed him and listened to him. He was upset and basically saying he had no idea why her heart stopped, why it wasn't starting again, and to call her personal doctor. He returned to her room, and she followed him back. They were working away, and she said she found that she had no feeling of fear or regret. She's been physically disabled for some time and was enjoying the freedom of movement and lack of pain. She said she saw the light, but wasn't hugely bright and more a feeling of peace and safety. And she felt that her parents were near, but Mom, being Mom, was more interested in what was happening to her and her body. I mean, if you are dead, it would be good to know why. The attending physician finally did something that worked to start her heart, and she said she was sucked back in. She was really pissed off because she knew she was about to start a wonderful adventure, and the doctor spoiled it. She said she didn't want to be in that fat, handicapped body. She struggled to get back out, but was held back, and then the drugs they gave her worked, and she became unconscious. My sister and I were sitting with her the next day. She was in a lot of pain from them pounding on her chest and pretty ticked off that she didn't get to go on her adventure. Hobbit jokes were ensuing when the attending physician came in to check on her. She asked him why they didn't know what happened and why she died. He didn't know what to say. She told him she'd left her body and had seen what happened. He patronized her and started to tell her about hallucinating and her brain being deprived of oxygen. She shut him off and demanded to know how she could have known what he said at the nurse's station, at the end of the hall, if she hadn't been there. She proceeded to repeat his conversation with the nurse. The doctor looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face went white, and he spun on his heel and bolted for the door. He actually bounced off both sides of the door before he was able to get out. That's how fast he was going. She said later that she never saw him again. My mother was never religious and didn't start now. Instead, she became more spiritual, something she had previously had no interest in. She just felt more at peace with herself and her condition, and started to pay more attention to the little things that people ignore in their rush, like sunsets and butterflies. She was buying all kinds of things, typical of people who don't want to admit that they are very ill. It's a way of staying connected with life. She stopped this behavior and said she didn't need things where she was going. This was always said with a smile. She asked that I share her story so that people know that there really is something after death. It's interesting and not at all scary. It has nothing to do with religion. What happens afterwards just seemed to be a fact like gravity is. She said she was surprised that she wasn't surprised. She died for real about a year later, and I'm sure since she had an inquisitive mind that she's enjoying herself. On a slightly different note, I've had several dogs who returned after they passed. The only ones who came back had huge personalities and felt real ownership of the house. The best story is about Joe, a little black Dachshund beagle who ruled the house for 10 years. The night after she passed, my ex heard her at the door. There was no mistaking her scratch and bark. I heard her too, as did the other dogs. He didn't believe in ghosts, but opened the door and called to her. Honey, our Doberman, was lounging in Joe's chair, and she got out of like she was shot. The other 2 dogs milled around as if they were greeting someone. I couldn't see her, but I talked to her as if she was there and explained what had happened and that she was to go on over the Rainbow Bridge. I'd join her when I could. The next morning when I came downstairs, Honey was in Joe's chair and made it clear that it was now hers. I think Joe gave it to her. She always was a beneficent queen. So this is secondhand from my dad, but he was always a little shaken up when he told this story. Years before I came along, my dad was cruising around on his motorcycle when a little dog ran into the road straight at him barking. He swerved so he wouldn't hit the poor pupper, and a car in opposing traffic did as well. My dad got clipped and thrown off his bike. It was on a hill, so he slid pretty far until his body hit a parked car. Now, the weird part, he always got this sort of haunted look when he talked about it, which wasn't very often. He says he remembers plain as day standing at the bottom of the street on the corner, watching as a man got hit off his bike and tumbled through the air and down the hill. He says he remembers thinking, that guy is definitely going to die. He woke up the next day in the hospital with a nurse picking gravel out of his back. He had reconstruction surgery on his hand and arm, which consists mostly of metal pins now. Remember, kids if on a motorcycle always wear your leathers and helmet. Without them, my dad would have died and I wouldn't be around. Edit. Some typos. Edit 2. I get it, there was a typo about hitting the dog. Please stop messaging me about it.